Peace and respect. Snake was right.
Hey,
Oh,
Richard.
Cootie, the star's here.
Oh, hold on. I'm the right headphones in.
Take your time. Tog can talk forever, man. Trust me.
For the minute, actually, I was just holding up. I'm gonna go drink some more and play video games, so I am out of your hair.
Oh, fine.
Yeah,
Fine.
I already made dinner plans because of everything that's going on. I'm actually trying to be on my because I'm a little bit inebriated right now. So, yeah.
Well, once again, you kept things rolling when you know I can't just talk by myself. I never was any good at that. So thank you very much, Tog.
You're welcome. I'll if I'm not gaming later and you're still on, I'll definitely hop back on for the
Right
most
on.
part. But yeah, I'll talk to you later. Nice to
Thanks a lot.
see you. Snake is right. Talk to you later.
Yeah.
How you doing, boss?
Oh, not too bad.
So I didn't do my regular introduction. What's that?
Got a nice stockpile going, so we're good through this quarantine.
Okay, cool. So for those who may not know you, would you tell a little bit about your channel, what you're trying to do, a little bit about why you got into YouTube in the first place, maybe something like that? Introduce yourself.
Well, I guess my channel could be boiled down to like skepticism. Although, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the foundation and I do have some things that I want to prove as well, like specifically morality. But I guess it all kind of stems from my skepticism of like society in general, because my thoughts on morality were, I mean, the general gist was there, but I really started to get interested in it when I was getting skeptical of politics in general and kind of likening a lot of politics and government to religious ways of thinking. And so, I mean, mainly what my channel does, I started off kind of debunking myths about swords. That was my...
Myths about what?
Swords. Like
swords.
Whether you could draw a sword from like a sheath that was on your back. Those were my first videos, and to this day, it's still my most successful. But but I just kind of go after whatever I'm kind of fixated on at the moment. Talked about Islam then, and then now I'm pretty much trying to recenter around morality and kind of libertarian related things, but I'm also really into debunking creationism at the time as well. So
I think some forms of creationism are pretty easily debunked. In fact, I'd call them low-hanging fruit. Not that I'm not trying to say that you're going after the low-hanging fruit. I don't see you doing that. But I think some of it is just, I don't know. I think there's a large percentage of like what I would call cognitive dissonance required to believe in some of those models.
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely low-hanging fruit, but I enjoy it nonetheless.
I'm trying to not insult you. You're like, yeah, it's just for fun.
It is. I mean, it's fun to get into the mind of like, why can't these people get it? And some of like, you don't want to believe it's because they just aren't capable of it. But then that gets into like, blaming them for, some kind of motivation outside of themselves. So I don't know, but it's kind of like flat earth to me.
The way I look at it is I shouldn't go around, because I have two good working legs and a strong back, I shouldn't go around kicking people in wheelchairs. I mean, I think that's just wrong. So I try to be respectful of whomever I'm speaking to. Present company discluded. You don't need that kind of consideration, but try to show them why what they're saying is illogical and can't be true in reality. I try to like gently bring them along without being mean or demeaning, which sometimes is really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that I'm, trying to be nice. I really don't like insulting during arguments because, I like to think that I'm nice, but also it's just for practicality's sake. If you trigger someone too much, they just shut down completely.
Sure.
And then it's like, then it just becomes a shouting match, and that's not interesting to me unless the insults are creative. then it's just a fun shit show. But
we should do a
still, it
show like
doesn't
that
accomplish
sometime.
much. Yeah.
Just come up with the best insults we can for each other. I think we're good enough friends we could stand that. That would be
Yeah.
fun.
A roast.
So if you would explain something to the viewing audience about your model of objective morality.
Yeah, and relating to skepticism a little bit, I am on the atheist side of kind of the religious debate, but I like to keep a critical eye out for my side, and that's I used to be like a political communist, and I was able to argue myself out of that, just because I do want to evolve in my ideas, and I don't want to play favorites. And so, I'm going through that in politics right now, where people ask me why I'm so harsh on like my side of the aisle, and it's because it's my side. I want to be able to be honest and hold my side accountable. And if you're not taking care of your own room, then it's kind of like relating to the Bible. What is that proverb? Take the stump out of your eye before you tell someone they got a splinter in theirs. It's kind of,
That's close. That's
but
pretty close.
Anyway, I am really bothered on the atheist side of things by they kind of try to avoid a lot of these religious arguments from morality, and by saying, well, there is no morality. It's all subjective and it's all relative. And I don't want to say whether it's because they're trying to avoid the morality argument or because they actually believe that there is no morality. That's kind of irrelevant to me, but I think it's pretty obvious how subjective morality is just like a self-defeating proposition. Otherwise, I mean, you can make that argument, but then there's no reason to use the word morality. There's no reason to talk about anything at that point. It's just like, okay, so you have nothing to complain about if you're saying it's all relative, essentially, other than you're just throwing a fit that I'm not doing what you want me to do, but who cares if there's no morality? So that's where I start off my critique. And basically, one of the perspectives I took was also looking at it from the perspective of like a god. If morality is determined by a god, is it just kind of an arbitrary decision? Is it just the preferences? Like, if God was just a petty kind of god or an evil god, would it be right to rape and murder if that's what God's rules were? And so I was thinking, if it's an evil god, we could be able to point out the mistakes in its reasoning. And if it's a good god, well, if it's just determined by that god, then there is no difference between a good and evil god. It's just whatever God says. So you have to be able to judge good and evil outside of what the God says. And if you're going to say, well, God is perfect, he can't be evil, then there must be a reason why God is deciding whatever he's deciding about morality. There must be some reason, and you can't just answer that with because it's his nature, because then you have to ask, why is his nature like that? And so there needs to be something to define that perfection.
My model actually addresses all those questions, which
yeah,
we haven't talked about that part of it, have we? The origination of God and what God is and our relationship to God and why those things are a necessity and why they're decided upon as they are and have to be.
As far as, you pretty much agreed with most of what I was saying, but I'm not sure how that ties into your model.
Oh, just that it's what I would call God is an animal, the first human being.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the physical nature of a human being, there are things that are beneficial and detrimental. Just because of the nature of the animal, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Not that those rules were made up by that individual, but it's just consequence of physics. I can freeze to death, for instance.
Yeah, and that would kind of be like, well, it's in your nature, but then there are reasons outside of that why that is your nature. It's like even if it's as simple as the protein just doesn't function in this temperature because of physics, it's still
Hmm.
it's not arbitrary.
Right. It's completely. I'm saying it's a complete, just a necessity of what the animal is, and
Mhm.
that's what defines what is good and what is evil, and it's species specific. Like
I
I could
would,
never make sense of a lion murdered a gazelle. I could never make sense of that because a lion doesn't do that.
yeah, I mean, there's some degree of where it appears to be kind of relative, whereas like but it's just you can't hold everything to the same standard as far as consciousness goes.
Hmm.
Uh, like I would still say that a lion eating a gazelle could be described as evil because you're ending the gazelle, but what can the lion do about it? It's just how it is. Like you
That's what
can't
I'm saying. It's
argue.
to the
It doesn't
lion
have a
that's good.
decision.
To the gazelle that's evil. That's what I'm saying.
Um, I think it can be both, almost. Like like overall, it's it's justifiable that there are some deaths because otherwise the whole system couldn't exist at all. Every life consumes itself. And so in that sense it's almost like a necessary evil, but the fact that it's necessary means that it's at least not as reprehensible as something that can be prevented by like a conscious mind. So I would even say a meteor striking the earth is evil. No one is doing that. There's not even a organism involved other than us dying, uh
Right.
but so I look at it. I tried to basically prove my position with syllogisms, and a lot of that hinges on definition. And so, what would I define good as is something. Uh, well, the best way to look at it or to understand it is what is it good for, and so that seems almost relative at first, but when you're looking at the totality of everything, it's what is good is what is increasing the amount of things that something is good for, or the amount of existence that is good for. So the more stuff that the system can do, the better it is. So if you have to include a couple of necessary evils in there to get a bunch more gazelles in there, even uh, the addition of lions is good because there's more stuff, there's more degrees of freedom, there's more things that the environment is good for, and the gazelles are going to have to die anyway. So
So
the
they
system consumes itself. So you might as well increase the amount of degrees of freedom in the system.
okay. So the only evil is a total void.
I
Can I
would say
say that?
that's kind of the not the ultimate evil, but the starting evil, if that makes sense. It's kind
Wow.
of the baseline.
I think I actually understood something of what you're saying.
Okay.
All right. That's the first time. That's pretty cool.
I think the one thing that's hard for me to work out is whether or not something can be more evil than total non-existence. Uh, like
Hmm.
like if all existence was just completely hellish for everything in it, no matter what, at all times, would that be worse than total non-existence? Um, I think you'd have to do some math for that one.
Gosh, I don't know. That's a pretty tough one.
Yeah.
Is it better to have loved and lost than to never have loved? Well, when it comes to
Yes.
love, I think
Yeah.
the writer, the poet of that set was trying to say it's better to live in misery than to have no life. I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that might be true, but I think what better to have loved than lost is kind of saying is misery is the price of happiness, which is what I would say is kind of the lesson in Genesis and the fall. Whereas if you make it literal, it makes no sense. But if it's all metaphorical, for as like the price of waking up and being enlightened and being aware is that you're aware of pleasures, but you're also aware of suffering.
Sure. That's two other places in the same text. And when he ate of the book in his mouth, it was sweet like honey, but when it was in his belly, it was bitter.
Mm-hmm.
So on first tasting it, it's sweet, but when you really digest it, it's very bitter. So it's both.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
But it's worth it at the same time.
I was consoling a 16-year-old who had recently broken up, this not too long ago, recently broken up with his girlfriend, and he was very, very depressed and, talking about all that sort of thing. And I said, I was your age and I broke up with this girl, and I looked back and I thought, man, she was really perfect for me. And I should have fought for her. I should have tried everything to keep her. I should have done whatever she asked me to do. I should have done anything necessary. But I got to tell you, man, I'm not sure that having her would have been as good as having the memory of her.
Mm-hmm.
And that memory of her kept me alive for 20 years through some pretty rough times, because I kept telling myself, well, someday I'll find her again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grown up now, and I would do it differently the second time.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience. And I look at it kind of like, well, like you said, do it better the second time, is we learn from these things. We learn it might hurt to burn your hand on the stove, but now you know not to burn your hand on the stove. So, and with anything, if you don't put the work in, you're not going to get the reward. So
that's true.
Suffering begets happiness, and happiness begets suffering. And that's kind of why I like some of the Eastern philosophies better, because they seem to highlight that a little more, at least, than basically like mainstream popular Western religions do.
Oh, I have to agree with you.
Yeah.
I've been recently making the argument that, and it struck me when I was listening to David Silverman debate Frank Turek and saying, oh, the Garden of Evil and the Garden of Eden, and God caused evil and it's God's fault, and that's wrong. And Silverman said it's wrong. And that's when it struck me that what Silverman was talking about was empathy. But he had empathy because of pain and suffering that he has seen or himself experienced.
Mm.
So it struck me, you can't have empathy without experience of pain and suffering. So how would you even care? And how could you have a deep and meaningful love, which includes empathy, without having suffered or seen suffering? So in that way, I think that suffering is very, very needed by us. And I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but I think it's true.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe theoretically you could come to the conclusion that, dispassionately, without empathy, conclude that the universe is better off without suffering. I think there are reasons to do that, but it's certainly a lot easier to understand that if you understand what suffering is. It's kind of like a shortcut. Although it can turn people bitter as well.
I think it does. I think it frequently does until they get to a certain point in their growth, in their learning.
But that's part of what I feel like, I think people can reach some sort of enlightenment where it's like an understanding of your place in the world. And a lot of that has to do with understanding the price of existing. And like I said, if it depends on the interpretation, like if you're talking about Genesis, you can look at it as literal, and that lesson doesn't seem to come through. But if you understand that it's a fairy tale, then then the lesson does come through. And that's why I think fiction's really powerful to us, is because it's especially like deep fiction. You know, there's a lot of shoot 'em ups and stuff that we like to watch visually, but deep things like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, I guess, are the best examples, like in movies. Yeah, or Frankenstein, I really like the book. It kind of hits at that notion where it's using characters and situations you can imagine to be literal to teach you a situation that's metaphorically true. But and even though you know it didn't happen, the lessons are what's true, and what why we would call it deep is because it applies to our lives.
Right. Do you think that okay, so here's the thing. I had an argument with somebody on Critical Cripple. Do you know Dave?
Yeah.
Okay. He was
A little
saying
bit.
that there's no reason to make a historical fiction that is presented as a historical fact. There's no advantage in that. Why not just present it as a historical fiction? And I think that's a reasonable thing to object to, but I have to believe that people on the whole, believing something is a fiction over believing it is a fact, are more likely to dismiss it. So I think the fiction has
terms
use,
of volume, I suppose.
Yeah, in just sheer numbers, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there are classic examples of fiction that have endured hundreds of years,
Sure,
or
there
even thousands. I mean, if you're going to include
Like the
the
Bible.
religious texts, but yeah,
Sure.
But I was thinking more like the Odyssey and the Iliad, things like that. But I mean, I guess there is a point to, if you're calling it fact like religions do, it does have a little bit more weight to it in a sense, but I feel like the more literal you get about it, the more you actually miss.
I don't know. It depends on what you mean by literal, I guess.
Like fundamentalist Christians, they believe, by the way, what did you just change glasses?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What did you have on before? Because it was, your eyes were completely see-through to your background.
I made myself some green screen toys.
Oh, okay. So you know what you're doing.
So it all depends on what you mean by literal. Like, is it that God used an animal unable of speech on 2 different occasions and made them literally physically speak to impress people who would read the story later? Is that what happened? Because if it's that kind of literal, you're talking about magic. Because neither a snake nor a donkey has the ability to make, it doesn't have the vocal cords and tongue and mouth movements to make those noises. It just can't do it. Yeah. So that's magic in the most real way, in the view of what your literal quote unquote Christian is professing. Okay. The way that I look at specifically the story of Balaam and the talking donkey, the talking ass, is that Balaam in that story represents governance who are proud and ignorant, which is why he can't see the angel. And then the lowly pack mule or the ass, sure-footed, dependable, wants to help Balaam. And while Balaam is beating it, he's still trying to save Balaam. So Balaam is riding on his back, and the ass sees the angel and turns away from the angel because the angel has a sword ready to kill Balaam. So the ass is trying to save Balaam while Balaam is beating it. Would be the story of the lowly, true, honest, dependable hero of the story, or in that case, the Christ. So what you have there is end times, the impending doom. That is the angel telling the truth, but also it's wielding a sword. And you have the beast of Satan, and you have Christ. So he's kind of like riding his back or riding his coattails, so to speak, which is throughout the text. It's said several times, several ways, that he pretends to be the Christ, thus why he's called the Antichrist. Okay. So in that way, is it literally true? Well, if end times happens and that's the actual situation and that's the way it really goes down, then yeah, it's literally true. Just doesn't involve any talking animals.
I mean, I would call that metaphorically true because you're using things that didn't actually happen to tell something that is true.
That does happen.
Yeah.
So how do you say that? It's figuratively true in the story, but literally true at the end of the whole tale. When the whole thing wraps up, it becomes literally true.
That the donkey literally spoke?
No.
Yeah.
That Christ literally ends up being trampled by, rode on the back of, the Antichrist rides his back, and that he sees all those things would be true.
Well, but even the phrase "ride on your back" is kind of it is a metaphor, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're not mistaken. I just don't know how to say that properly, because it's like it's historically inaccurate and metaphorical, but then it becomes true later in a very literal way, if the interpretation is correct.
Yeah, I mean the interpretation could be literal, but the interpretation, I think, takes would have to view some elements of the story as clearly fictional.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that what Christians are describing is literal-figurative, like it's real things that happened. You're supposed to live your life by now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying the exact opposite, that it's figuro-literal. It's figurative of the past, but literal of the future.
I think I get what you're saying.
I don't know a good. Well, I said I don't know a good way to say it. I really don't. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to talk about these kind of things and really explain like deep spiritual things, but that's why I think fiction is one of the more potent ways to get it across, is because you see it in action and not necessarily just explained like step by step. And you almost absorb it through osmosis.
Yeah, it's much better as a colorful story. Absolutely. Yeah. Even if the story can't happen in physics, even if it can't happen, that doesn't matter so much.
Mm-hmm. Like I think the more literal you get, like if you're interpreting Star Wars through that, then you just see it as it's a story about spaceships and space wizards and stuff like that, and it's like you can tell the same story in a completely different setting, basically. And it's, to me, it's always about the choices of the characters and not the setting. The setting is like visual appeasement, I guess. Visual pleasure, stimulation.
I guess the setting has to fit somewhat in some specific cases, but in a lot of places it could be just very, very general. Like if I said everyone were in sackcloth and ashes, and there's even an actual Jewish tradition of like smearing your body with ashes. Mm-hmm. But why do they have this weird tradition? Like, why is it important that you burn wood and smear ash on your body? That sounds stupid. Now you got to go wash it off. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But and that it's the whole scene, the whole thing is in like this desert area, and people wear sandals. So they're wearing sandals, and there's talking about being in the field, and they're filthy from being in the field. But dirt doesn't make you filthy. It's just not true. You have to have oily dirt to make you filthy. Or you have to have ash. Ash will stick to you really well. you know, because you're moist skin. So I think easily they could be describing the aftermath of a volcanic eruption local.
Mm-hmm.
Because that really would make you like walking in sand and filthy. It really would.
Yeah, well, it's pretty crazy to think a lot of these things are probably inspired by great disasters in the past, and people either embellished over time or they just didn't know what was going on or what to say about it.
I could see that for some of it. I could actually see that for some of it. For some of it, that doesn't work. I've heard people say, "Oh, the Bible is justification of the Jews', origin story and why they look at life the way that they do." And I think that works for some of it, but it doesn't work universally. Like, why make up history just to follow that and change the way your people were living to match something that you made up?
Yeah, I don't think it's deliberately made up. It's interesting because if you look at faith traditions that are more classically considered already to be fictional, like the Greek pantheon, I'm sure they believed it was all true, and I'm not sure how literal they would have taken it. Whether it's more they understood the characters to be literal living gods or just kind of traditions. But I would think that there was some amount of literalism there, that they actually believed that there was a god that was hurling lightning bolts. And I think, well, people back then wouldn't have understood necessarily what lightning was, or they definitely wouldn't have understood why things happen, like why there's flooding, why a volcano suddenly erupts, and they would think of, well, this is the only explanation, is that someone made it happen. And then I think, they try and figure that out and talk about it among themselves, and it mixes with the stories of the past. Maybe they have a story about an epic hero that they all thought was fiction, and now someone's like, no, this is the hero returning, or someone pissed off the god that's in our stories. And then I also think it changes over time, just from a game of telephone, like just basic miscommunications or unintentional embellishments. But I also think poets would get their hands on it and just embellish a little bit, and then the next person would think that embellishment was part of the original true story, and so it gets a little bit more dramatized over time. That's kind
How
of
would we know the difference?
It would be hard to know the difference, but we could suss out the probability. Like, usually when we're reading historical manuscripts, if we come across something that seems magical, that seems extraordinary, that we can't replicate today, that is basically attributed as an embellishment, even if we think that the character they're talking about was a historical figure. Then those things that say, like, well, this person came back to life, basically, I mean, we can't technically know that it didn't happen, but we can say, well, this probably didn't happen because we're not currently seeing anything like this.
I think Christians miss a lot of the context that I find obvious. I mean, I was an anti-theist when I read the text, so I wasn't looking at it through a Christian lens, not at all. If I asked a Christian if Jesus died before he was baptized, that's obviously out of order. He got baptized and then was crucified and raised from the dead, according to the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he hadn't been killed when he was baptized. But when he's baptized, is a quote from God saying, "Today I have begotten you, first begotten of the dead." Well, then what's the dead mean there? It doesn't mean you've died, because he's not yet killed and resurrected. So what does the dead mean? Well, the only way to take the dead in context right there is a group who are going to die, like a prediction. So if what he's saying is, I've brought you out of those who are going to die, well, then that works. But it certainly couldn't be that he was physically dead.
Yeah, I mean, the interpretation that strikes me is kind of a God would kind of have a fourth dimensional or above fourth dimensional view where he sees all of time at once, and he knows Jesus
Possibly.
is going to be the first that came from the dead, or the first to be resurrected. And so that's already his title, because God already knows the end of the story. But
Then the line should be, "You will be,"
yeah,
or
I
"I
mean,
will make you," or something like that.
if it was going to be
But
strictly technically correct, so yeah.
But what it actually reads is present tense.
Mm-hmm.
I have raised you out of the group that will be dead. I first begotten of the dead.
Well,
So it's kind of true the way you're saying it. It fits within the context I'm trying to describe, and probably not doing the best job of it, that it's predictive.
yeah, in either sense, yeah.
So it wasn't that he was already killed and raised from the dead. That doesn't even fit in the story, but it's a prediction of his position. But it changes the phrase "the dead" to mean something else. It doesn't mean the dead, those who have already died. It means the dead, those who will die.
But in the future, they have already died.
You could say that, but
God's
the
already in the
story's
future.
but the story's chronological. I have to stick to that.
Yeah.
You have God already, but see, but that just if that were true, that would only make God able easily to tell the story. It doesn't mean that the story has to be in that non-order or that B theory of time. The story's chronological, describing an A theory of time, as I understand them. So if I take that, the dead, meaning those who are going to die, and I say raised from the dead, which I see a lot, that would only mean brought out of the group who are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no longer magic.
How is that?
It's just getting rid of the sentencing. It's just bringing out of them out of the eventuality they were going to do.
Because I mean, couldn't you apply that to everyone?
Sure.
Because everyone's going to die. Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I get what you're saying now.
I mean, if the Bible were correct about itself, it's promising an eternal life with flesh, despite what some Christians say. So yeah, people have died in the past. That's true. But in the story that it's talking about, it's talking only about a 7-year period. And at the end of that 7 years, anybody who's left dies. So anyone who leaves that group and decides not to be part of that group are raised from the dead.
Not to be a part of mortal beings, you mean?
Yeah, they've chosen to not stay mortal. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I would want to know how to choose that.
Oh, that's simple. When this thing behind me arrives, just understand that that's heaven. When you meet actual angels and they're like beautiful and bigger than you are, brilliant, nice, patient, polite, and they tell you what the deal is, believe them. And if that never happens, don't worry about it. I think it's pretty simple, actually.
I mean, I might be inclined to believe them, but I have a few questions first.
What would you ask?
That
would be interesting.
I don't know, maybe Some like show me around. I don't know. what's going on? Where are you guys from?
I can tell you that from the Bible.
I probably asked
why they look questions.
Why they look the way they look or whatever.
They look like us, only prettier and a little bit taller, according to the text. They're just us.
Yeah.
Like if you go to Revelation, and I'm dyslexic with certain numbers and certain times if I haven't practiced it enough. It's either Revelation 5:7 or 7:5. But anyway, it's the part. The line is no man can number, no man could count, and it's an angel talking to John, John the Revelator, not John the Divine. But anyway, so he's talking to John. He says, "Who are all these?" And John says, "You would know better than I would." Well, why would the angel know better than he would? Because he's talking to an angel, and it identifies them as angels. Okay. And then the angel says, "Yes, I do know better, and I'm going to now describe them. These are those that," past tense, "went through the great tribulation. And they washed their clothes in the blood of the Lamb and now reside with God," present tense. So how they got to be an angel living with God was they went through end times. So according to the text, what kind of an animal goes through end times? See, it's just describing people on an earth.
Yeah.
It's just saying that angels were people on an earth. That's all.
So what do you mean by an end times? Like just their end? Their personal end?
Well, you know, this planet can only support so many human beings. There's a limit to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if, quote unquote, Abraham is going to have children like sands of the sea, you can't do that with one planet.
So like, would there be multiple end times?
Yeah, one for each planet.
Okay, so they're from a different planet.
Yeah, they're just from an Earth-like planet, something very, very similar to this.
Okay.
So it would be, I mean, this is exactly what we're fighting to do right now. Go ahead.
So could they not be people who have died on Earth? Could the angels, I guess, for anyone who's like reached enlightenment on Earth, or do they have, like, I guess I'm asking because if they're ones from the end times, then does all of humanity have to die for any of us?
That's a Christian assumption. That's a Christian assumption directly not stated in the text, but the actual opposite is stated.
Okay.
That it says if you hang out on this planet long enough and refuse heaven long enough, and the earth is being destroyed and you stay for that, it's going to kill your body.
Okay.
But everyone who doesn't stay that long goes to this promised place, flesh and all. There's nothing about their bodies dropping dead or them being lifted up in a whirlwind or anything like that. There's nothing like that. What it actually says is that angels have physical self, and that you keep your physical self, and that your physical self would be fixed, so it doesn't, quote unquote, age, so it doesn't, quote unquote, have disease, so it doesn't, quote unquote, have birth defects, etc., like that, is what's being described in the text. And that restoration of those who have died in the past, and this takes me some extrapolation, but because of requiring flesh, but those who've died of the past, the flesh is just dead. It's rotted away. Doesn't do them any good now. But they'll be restored in that futuristic home that our ancestors maintain. I think the only way that you could accomplish that is if you greatly multiplied the births that Eve experiences in sorrow. That is, have women having babies. But in the curse of Eve leaving the garden, part of the curse is she is pregnant. She's having a lot of babies, but she's desiring of her husband. But I think people don't desire things they have. They desire for things they want but don't have. So it looks to me like she's pregnant a lot, having babies a lot, but she's not having sex with her dude. Which would explain, I think, I don't know enough about genetics to definitively say this, but I see it in the text, and I expect that somebody who knows much more would verify this as plausible. If you had a big enough sampling group of descendants, could you take genetic material from those descendants if you knew what the genetic material was supposed to be and you had the technology, and you could piece it back together and make mom and make dad, and then with that group make their mom and dad, then with that group make their mom and dad, and keep working your way backward like that? Do you think that's possible?
So you're not talking about Eve just being able to get pregnant on her own. You're talking about
artificial insemination, essentially.
But with people's genetic material who've already died.
Right. Like recreating your ancestry.
I would say that there's no known mechanism for that, because your brain and experiences are not stored in your DNA. There's a couple of things that influence your brain that can be changed epigenetically.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like strict memories go, I mean, there's no indication that we know how that might work. Like,
well, yeah, but what you just said is we can't prove the human being has a spirit. And I agree with you, we can't.
Yeah.
But if the text is correct about a human being having a spirit reserved for them in heaven, then that's kind of the answer to that.
Then that would be where the memories are stored?
Apparently.
Okay. Yeah, and then
But I mean, just physically, I think it would be...
you need a machine to insert the soul into the right person and stuff, I guess.
I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
But I think it's at least plausible that with the right technology and understanding and mapping of what exactly, like my dead grandma, like if it was actually like in a computer somewhere, what her exact genetic code was, then certainly one of my living sisters going into that futuristic habitation that we would call heaven in European culture, others call it different things. That if they had that map, they could certainly like replicate that in a working egg in one of my living sisters, and she would literally give birth to my grandmother.
At least the body,
right?
Sure.
I'm just mean the body.
Yeah.
So that's like physical restoration. The rest of the restoration I can't speak to. We don't even have a working theory on it. All that we can say is we don't know if a human being has a spirit. And of course, got that hard problem of consciousness and all that stuff. Other things we're only starting to work out. So of course I can't speak to that. I'm not more educated than Daniel Dennett, that's for sure. But it looks to me from the text that that's what's being described as restoration of our physical lineage at that time, as what Eve's job is.
Okay.
That is Eve as female leaving the garden as meaning Earth.
So people of planet Earth wouldn't be getting restored until after Earth had ended, basically? Yeah. Okay.
And then you'd have regular gestation and stuff. And of course, the more of them that you had, the more there could be reproduced. It'd be exponential.
Okay. So who would be in charge of bringing on the end times, I guess?
Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, the Grim Reaper, or Christ, depending on what you want to call him.
Are those the 4 horsemen?
No. Those are major angels, archangels.
Yeah. Okay.
It actually.
So the angels from the other planet would help out the other planets, basically.
Yeah, and it's just a continuous cycle is being described, where we go forward and we do the same thing for somebody else somewhere else.
And then would God be like the first one?
Exactly.
Okay. The one who started the first cycle, I guess.
Yeah, probably refer to himself as the first Christ.
Okay.
The first anointed chosen one, the first enlightened being, the first. I like that. But a human being.
That makes more sense to me than when you say like God is the first human being. Like the first in the ancestry. It seems like with the criteria we just talked about, like the first enlightened being, it doesn't seem like he would have to be the first in the lineage.
I guess it wouldn't be necessity.
Or is that kind of like separating the creator from the Christ?
I think the reason that the text is so confusing to Christians when they say things like God does and doesn't have a body. And the reason they say things like that, like you've got Christophany and what's the other word? Theophany, where you have physical appearance in the, written of in the text of God appearing, like God calls out to Noah from inside the ark and say, come into me. Okay. And he walks in the Garden of Eden, etc., like that. I think that's explained by it being a collective of people all doing the same thing. So yeah, they have flesh, but then God is love. God is not flesh. So God is their objective, the thing that they do, their cooperative effort. That is God. But they have flesh like you and I have flesh. But they're of knowing of truth to where they can do the right thing. And from what I can tell from the story, that would have started long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away with a singular individual who started this process that we would call, life on Earth.
Okay, so enlightenment would kind of be figuring out how to survive the apocalypse, or
I think enlightenment would be
being able to contact the ones who know how.
Oh gosh, that'd be awesome. No, I think what's being described is an intervention because we couldn't do this on our own. Like we literally would not be able to get ourselves proper shielding, get ourselves as a space commune environment, traveling away from this planet, that we would actually never do that. That the natural functions of nature would kill us off before we did that. And how that ever happened at all, anywhere, I have no idea, but apparently it did. But what the story is saying is that it happened somewhere, and that race or kind or family or whatever you want to call it of animal became extremely technologically advanced, inventing life where they needed, and made a slave, but they improved the slave class too much. So there was an entire crop of slave class that were all born male. And they started looking at it when it was getting close to its birth cycle, or when they were first born. And they didn't agree with it as a slave, so they slaughtered them off. But one of them, its gestation mother, not its genetic mother, its gestation mother, did something super stupid. Put pine tar on the inside and outside of a basket, put it in the basket, and floated it down the river. By the way, that's a stupid way to preserve somebody, because you got wild animals and stuff. You got, torrents and rivers, and babies don't swim well. So that's a really dumb thing to do. But the king of the land's daughter finds it and kind of keeps it as a pet, even though she shouldn't have. and secretly hires its own mother to nurse it, its physical gestation mother to nurse it.
Okay.
And it's very, very, very different from the rest of the slave class. So it's brought up in government. It's taught about technology. It's taught about taxation, etc. Business. It's taught how to be a business person, and becomes high in society over slaves and even over the free class. And then it gets its freedom.
And that would these be the same species?
Would they be the same species? The slaves and the master class?
Yeah.
I don't know. In the story in the Bible, it uses Pharaoh Egyptian and Moses Jew. You know, it's using, I don't know what else it would use as examples though, besides human beings, because they're acting intelligently. Like, I don't know what you could use from this planet as examples aside from that. So how similar they are, I don't really know. But that sounds like the example was two human beings that were pretty darn dissimilar, as much as human beings can be, to tell the story.
Because I'm understanding it as, you know, the people on the other planets, but they're still human.
Well, I don't know if they started from scratch or used some of their own genetic material. I mean, it just doesn't go into that kind of detail. But from what I can tell, the slave class was very much different.
Okay. But the ruling class isn't the enlightened beings from a different planet.
The ruling class is not enlightened. It depends on what you mean by enlightened. Technologically advanced?
No, I mean like to enter heaven, or the angels.
Okay. I'm confused.
The ones you're talking about who survived the end times.
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking, they're humans, right?
Yeah, it's just talking about us, physical descendants, all human beings.
Okay.
But that story tells about the first
necessarily
human being in the universe. That would be the story of the first human being in the universe. It was an accident.
The Moses character?
Yeah. Which would represent God.
Okay. So would Moses's ancestors be the same species?
Would Moses' ancestors
what's going on there?
If you try to apply it to the history of this planet, you already know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So let's drop that whole idea.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like how I would read it. Like just according to
from what I can tell, just call Pharaoh space alien.
Okay.
Just call Pharaoh space alien and the rest of it follows.
Yeah. Because I think when you were talking to Eric Murphy, there was something about, he said, like, how could I come to the same conclusions as you with the same reading frame as you?
Yeah.
So I still feel like I'm not sure of the reading frame, because I'm just confused, like what species are we talking about?
What species of alien?
I guess
its story doesn't tell.
If you want to use those terms.
Well, intelligent, not living on this planet. That's an alien.
Okay.
So it's definitely, to me, in my reading frame, describing an intelligent that doesn't live on this planet.
So the Egyptians were not
only represent. Well, it depends on what you mean by enlightened, because for them and their kind, they are enlightened. But for us and our kind, they're not. Like, we got different goals.
Okay. So, but then whoever Moses was, you're saying is also God, the progenitor, and the first one to understand how to shed his mortality in the human lineage?
I think I think the slaves were made immortal in the first place. Wait, I have to differentiate between immortal and eternal. Not immortal, eternal. That is, they don't die of old age, but stuff could kill them. Okay. I see that being described. So, like in the War in the Heavens, Michael loses 4,000 of his angels. Well, wait a minute. I didn't know angels could die. Yeah, apparently in the text, angels can die. Okay, so that you have to keep that in mind. They're eternal beings, not immortal beings. Like if you chop off their head, they're done. You know, but you're not going to age them to death. You're not going to minor injury them to death. That's not going to work.
All right. So their bodies are they're immune to aging, but not physical harm?
Yeah, just like some animals here are.
Okay.
I mean, just really natural, you know, just really, really good shape genetically, physically.
Just kind of like, are you familiar with the elves from the Tolkien universe?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Something like that.
I mean, it's interesting to kind of compare it to those fictions, but in that universe, the elves and the humans were separate creations.
Mm-hmm.
But the elves could bestow immortality on the humans by bringing them to their undying lands.
Okay.
I wonder if that means anything to you.
There's something in the water. It's just a story. I mean, I'm not saying that J.R.R. Tolkien was inspired by God to write Lord of the Rings.
But does that sound about right? Or
I think it's simpler than that. I think the stuff that we're right now calling junk DNA or non-coding DNA or whatever we're calling it this year, I don't know. I think is potential. It's unrealized potential held back. And I think there's a story of the holding back of the potential in chapter 6 of Genesis, yet that man is flesh, his days shall be numbered 120 years.
Okay.
So despite the fact he has flesh, he's not going to live forever. Like it's like saying that something made of flesh is designed to live forever.
So we should be looking into the non-coding DNA for anti-aging genes.
Anti-aging genes. I don't know if that's saying it the right way.
How
about genetic material in the non-coding regions that would cause us to stop having deterioration of telomeres? How about that?
Yeah.
I'd say it like that. That's as close as I can get with my knowledge.
Okay. I mean, that'd be nice to find something down there.
Well,
and in theory, if we could evolve, it would probably pass through the non-coding DNA, those genes at some point, if we could evolve those abilities.
In 2016 in Science Magazine July edition was a buried article that was only a half a page long, and it wasn't even on the cover. That there's two schools of thought about human genetics. There's CRISPR. You already know what that is.
Mm.
But then there's removal of what they originally were calling microRNA blockers. Because the non-coding region is not coding for a reason. It's not just accidentally not coding. There's something in the way. So in 2016 in Science Magazine, it was reported that United Nations was funding laboratories around the world to try to find the answer to that. And they said they'd have it solved in the next 10 years. So by 2026.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything in the DNA currently that would solve that issue, but there's probably progenitors if we could figure that out. It's a complex issue. I hope they are working on that. That's one of the things that I mean, we're kind of distracted by and just accepting of death. And so I mean, I would think that people would want to be working on anti-aging type of technology, like at breakneck pace.
We're definitely working on that sort of thing. There's no doubt. It's
yeah,
just
we
not.
are. It just seems like it should be at the forefront of
You want to hear something funny?
Technology. Yeah.
Here's something really funny. A little observation about human nature that I think most people would agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings want to be beautiful. Human beings want to live forever.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who wants to be ugly. Human beings want to travel space.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what I see the text describing already done. It's to be gifted to us. Exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
Permanently beautiful traveling space. Which is exactly what we're trying to do ourselves. Which makes sense why someone else would have done it first. They just had to try first. And succeed.
Well, I think we could achieve kind of like an internal happiness, I guess. But well, have you heard of the story of the tyrant dragon? I think
from which culture?
I'm not sure if it was based on anything, but it was actually where I got it from was it was it's not a research paper, but it was a published paper by a scientist who was trying to highlight how we need to research against like aging and stuff like that. And the point of the story is kind of this dragon moves into town basically and kind of takes over the world and demands that we give it sacrifices and stuff. And so people are just sent to the dragon every day so it doesn't destroy everything. And so at some point everyone just gets used to it and is like, well, and the dragon represents death basically. Mm-hmm. And they're just kind of like, well, it's inevitable. It's just the way things
just people go and get eaten by the dragon when they're 32 years old, and that's just how it is.
Yeah. And at some point everyone woke up and was just like, well, no, everyone on Earth needs to be dedicated to figuring out how to take out this dragon.
Kill the dragon, yeah.
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 And so the point is basically like, the dragon represents death, and we can cope with death and accept death, or we can try to fight it.
I could say the principal idea of what that person was trying to say is evil. That defeating death on this planet would be an evil thing to do. So let's say that you had a vial in your hand, and you had come up with the chemical formula that knocks the microRNA blocker off our genetic material, and it starts coding, and it results in an immortal being. An eternal being. That would be the result in a human being. So let's say that was in your hand right now. What do you do?
Well, I guess it would be different if it was eternal versus immortal.
I mean, eternal.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I mean, if it was eternal, I would probably require a bit of an entrance exam. I don't know.
So how do you what are you going to test for? And what's the qualities you want?
I guess enlightenment or pseudo enlightenment, something close to that.
I guess I don't understand your entrance exam. What do you mean by that?
Well, I would want to keep evil people away from having.
Okay, so now you're the arbiter of evil. Go ahead.
Well, if I'm tasked with the guardianship over the cure to all death, I would have to take on that. I think it would be more evil to just give it out to anyone.
True. And let's just explore that for a minute. What if you gave it to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
What would be the result of that? Let's say you just made mass production and aerosoled it all over the planet.
Yeah.
What would happen?
Well, that might be actually the solution. Because if everyone's eternal, then no one can really spoil anything for everyone else.
Well, then how do people die, and how do you avert overpopulation?
Well, it wouldn't matter at that point. They're eternal, so
You could still starve to death.
wouldn't that just be immortality?
I think, okay, we have different definitions. To me, immortality means can't be killed. Do you want immortality to mean live forever as long as you're not killed?
That's what I thought you were saying. Is
Okay, let's go with.
immortality is cure
Let's use your definition.
Okay.
Let's use your definitions, just because I'm asking you a bunch of questions. It should be clearer to you than me.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say that you had a potion that knocked off the genetic blocker and made human beings immortal, and you aerosoled it all over the planet so that all human beings were immortal.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen?
I'm not sure I see much of a downside, although other than overpopulation.
Okay, so
Now,
what
it would be
what
more
are the
of
symptoms of overpopulation?
It'd be more of a problem if they were eternal and could not die of any cause.
Right. By the way, when I said eternal, I meant could physically be killed. Like chop off your head, you're done. You're not going to heal from that.
Yeah,
that's what I meant by eternal.
I had it backwards.
We'll use your definition. It's no problem.
Okay.
We'll use words comfortable for you. Okay, so people stop dying of diseases and they don't age once they get to adulthood. So you pointed out a population problem, and you'd be right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about distribution of resources like food? There's only so much farmland you can have.
Yeah. I think we could adapt to that. I mean, it's hard to imagine because the mechanisms for what would kill us and what would not kill us are a little ambiguous. Like, if we're immune to infectious disease, are we immune to radiation poisoning?
Let's not get into that kind of nitty gritty. I see your point, and it's valid. That would be hard to sort out. But let's just keep it super basic.
I'm just thinking of like settling other planets. If no one was dying, then people could become pretty good experts over their long lifetimes, and
sure,
I think it'd be a little easier to push technology even further.
Okay. So if we, without straw manning anyone, let's take it out of your hand because you don't have money and you're not a research scientist. Let's put it in the hand of the actual person who would have it in their hand. Okay, so that would be high-level, well-funded research scientist would have it in their hand.
And probably a board of a company or whatever.
Sure. Okay, so what are they most likely to do?
Well, depending on how conspiratorial you want to get.
No, I'm just talking about human nature, just realistically. I don't want to straw man anyone or call anyone evil. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you'd have to be practical with something like this.
It could go a couple of ways. I think if we're going down the Illuminati route, they'd keep it for themselves and their private club. If they're doing it, they could be doing it for profit, or they could be doing it for humanitarian reasons.
Like let's go with humanitarian.
Well, I think it's probably more likely that they would do it for profit, but
let's go with the humanitarian route anyway.
Okay.
Because the other route's so obvious.
Yeah.
The rich people would get it and everybody else, no. Then you'd have rich people that live forever. That's what you'd have.
The rich would get it first. I think it would probably trickle down, like now most people can afford it, at least.
Eventually it'd be an affordable drug.
Yeah. Well,
that's funny. Maybe you'd be right. I don't know.
Well, if it's I guess it depends on how it works. If you have to take it every week, Maybe
No,
not. If it's a
from what I
one-time
understand,
cure-all.
from what I understand, it's a one-time thing.
Okay.
And then it would alter your DNA to where you didn't make those blockers, and then your offspring would also be immortal beings, and so would their
yeah,
offspring. It would just be the end of that blocker.
So then the market would just shift down to the next lowest economic rung, and it would keep shifting, and at some point the price would stabilize. And I think it's kind of like iPhones. Like now, poor people have iPhones, but they're like 10 models behind the current one or something.
Right.
But I mean, humanitarian would face probably supply shortages as well. They might have to do it by lottery at first. I'm not sure.
Just some extrapolation. Not that I'm saying this kind of detail is in any spiritual text. I don't see it. But just a little bit of extrapolation. If eternity, if an eternal being, an immortal being that had to have catastrophic injury to be killed, were populated on this earth, I think it couldn't be given to the populace because farming and food supplies couldn't keep up with the population increase that would automatically happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could devote your best scientists, your best maintaining soil. You could do everything. There's no way you'd keep up with that. So you'd have to say you can't have kids anymore.
At some point we'd adjust, whether it's, preemptively people decide not to have kids or not, or there's a temporary period where a bunch of people have kids and they can't feed them. And then after that, we just get used to the new norm. Somewhat like some population will survive through it and adjust, but
yeah,
how many people die in between the transition?
So I think because of those things and those considerations, I think it's easy to believe that people who would fund that kind of research and people who would complete that kind of research would not just generally release it to the public, but would reserve it for, I don't know, you said I have to do some interviews, whatever standard they thought was appropriate to use. And I don't know what that standard would be. But I don't think it would just be like aerosol over the planet and one day everybody's no longer dying of diseases, no longer dying of old age.
Yeah.
That they'd have to have something from outside of themselves kill them, Yeah,
and it depends on how much information is available to the public too. If most of the research that supports this new technology is already out there, then a bunch of people are going to figure it out independently. But I think if they're going to be choosy, then they'll probably choose whoever's kind of in the club already.
I would think so.
It might not necessarily be like a dark, like cabal of Illuminati.
Wow. It doesn't even need that.
Yeah.
Just regular folks and, hey, I got this cool invention. I'm going to give you some.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be secretive or crazy or anything.
Well. I
So
feel like you would probably need to keep most of the public from knowing about it, or else there might be riots.
That's an interesting thought. Like I said, it came out in 2016 in Science magazine, but it wasn't on the cover when it's definitely front page news.
What was it again?
That they felt like they were 10 years away from freeing the human genome.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that should be front page stuff, even on Science magazine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was buried. It was a half a page.
Kind of hidden in plain sight.
Yeah. It was like 2/3 of the way through the magazine. I found it by accident.
Yeah, it's I don't know. So it's hard to explain what people will find sensational or won't be attracted to.
Yeah, I'm not an editor of Science Magazine. That's true. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what they want to buy and what they want to sell, but it seems to me that should be a big deal, you know?
Yeah.
But then there's all these intrinsic problems with the circumference of the planet and how much of the planet we can actually use and how much we'll be able to use in the future, when we're already saying, or there's a lot of us saying, that we're overcrowded now, you know? So I can't imagine anyone who thinks that we're overcrowded now saying, yeah, let's give it to everybody. Can't imagine that.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, the population will naturally just conform to how many resources you can produce.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you were just immune to aging, you would still get hungry, right?
Sure.
And
You'd still get hungry. You could still starve to death. You could still freeze to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's probably been some math done on that, actually. That'd be interesting.
Haven't looked into it yet.
Yeah. Population mathematics, but people don't age. That'd be interesting to see.
Well, you could look into I don't know if we've done population equations on logger. We probably have on loggerhead turtle. You could look into that one. A loggerhead turtle doesn't die of old age. So you could look into loggerhead turtle, because that's an endangered species at some point. So I'm sure people did math on that. See how long it'd take to recover and whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're actually biologically immortal, but there's a species of jellyfish that basically can cycle through its larval stage and essentially never die.
Right. The reason I say loggerhead turtle is because, as far as I know, it actually does not die of old age.
Mm-hmm.
And they stay perfectly healthy into their hundreds of years old. So, like in Finding Nemo, the cartoon, the rad teenage loggerhead turtle who's 750 years old, it's not impossible to think of a 750-year-old turtle as being a teenager. It's actually not impossible.
Yeah. I mean, I think I looked into the lobster immortality, and it's kind of a myth.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that, like, they can continuously keep growing forever, but that growth actually will kill them at some point.
Yeah. Looked at our last conversation. Someone in the side chat was talking about skeletal collapse.
Yeah.
During molting, that's the problem.
Yeah.
They can only get so big, and that's it. But I guess if it was protected and nourished and taken care of, and there was nothing there to eat it, and it could just flop around with broken legs or whatever, it keep going.
Yeah.
But in the case of lobsters, they couldn't even be around other lobsters. Other lobsters would eat them.
On life support, yeah.
Yeah, as a life support, yeah. Needs an exoskeleton, like what was that, X-Men with the metal skeleton? What was that? Wolverine.
Oh, Wolverine, yeah.
Yeah, Wolverine.
Endoskeleton.
needs a Wolverine exoskeleton.
Yeah. But the cure for human mortality, I think, is probably more likely to come in the form of machines, like where we
that's what most of us think.
Transition into robots. That's like a whole new dimension of evolution there.
Yeah, the problem that I have with that is what makes Cindy Crawford beautiful is the weird mole.
Yeah,
it's the perfection is not perfection, Yeah. Perfection is off perfection, and it has a lot to do with individual taste and eccentricities and strange little things. And that's what perfection is. So I don't know if I could handle being in a perfect environment that I'm actually in a machine. I don't know.
Well, even if the machine kind of perfectly replicated humans, I think eventually they would kind of lose a lot of the quirks of being human. Like if you could just type up a few things on the computer and press enter, and that's how you reproduce, and like the factory just makes their body, then I think definitely we'll lose some of the like the need for sexuality. Certainly. Fashion would probably change as well. People would probably tend to want to look less and less human as time goes on.
Hard to say.
But I think that's inevitable as far as evolution goes. We're going to change anyway.
You could be right. Seems like an eventuality in the way that we understand reality now.
Yeah.
I think I'm ready to wrap it up, man.
All right.
But you're always fun, you know?
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to wrap up before you go?
No, I like learning about the way you interpret things, and I think
Thanks.
I think I'm getting it.
Yeah. I only know of 3 people aside from myself who can apply this broad spectrum to other stories and get the same results, that they understand it at that level. And, it didn't take brainwashing them and beating them again and again and again with the same information. It just took a defined enough definition that it could be understood,
Mm-hmm.
And I think anyone who can do that critically is going to get the same results I've gotten, So I don't think I was prejudiced when I accepted it as a reading frame,
Yeah, I think you could work a little bit on kind of condensing it into like an elevator pitch kind of thing.
You're not the first one to say that. I'm working on that. I'm mulling it over in my head, trying to get it organized that way now.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's one of the hardest things to do for a complex anything.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, I did it a little bit when I narrowed it down to cryptic prophetic animism. That's what I was beginning that idea process of how to do that when I came up with that. That is what is being described in my view.
Yeah.
Those are really strict, nice, clean terms, but it's not a great definition of the overall thing. It needs more nuance,
I think it's probably a good label, but the label isn't the description.
Right.
Certainly. It can help. It can kind of help understand the description, but.
So you're the third person in 2 weeks who said that to me. I should do that. So I am going to be trying to do that. I am.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, how is your paper presentations going along, and critiques you've gotten and progress you've made on yours?
As far as morality.
Yeah, the objective morality work.
It's been all right. I mean, I've mostly been going into Christian circles, so they don't obviously receive it as well as I would want them to. But I think people generally kind of on the atheist side accept it. And I really wanted to talk to some atheists who are convinced of like a subjective morality or relative morality.
Mm-hmm.
And see how that goes, which I haven't really done at all, other than just in my private life.
Well, there's something to be said for private conversation. I mean, when I speak with you and you speak with me, or at least the way I perceive you, is that you're not treating me like you're on a show. You're treating me like you're having a conversation with me.
Yeah, I mean,
like we could just as easily be sitting somewhere at a restaurant right now having the same talk.
Yeah, that's
but
why
a lot
I
of
get
people
into
who
it.
are a lot of people who are having conversations in public like this, where they put them on YouTube, that they're not doing that. They're not having a conversation. They have an agenda. They're thinking about what their channel means to them and how they want to move the channel forward and things like that. So
Mhm.
because of that, they're not really having honest conversation, in my opinion. But you might get honest conversation out of, and it's totally out of his public range, but I think he would be honest about it. Perhaps Steve McRae, perhaps Skylar Fiction, almost definitely Sock Account.
Mhm.
Joshua Schroed is brilliant like you are and very, very honest. And I mean that in the best possible way.
Yeah, I want to talk to Skylar Fiction. Steve McRae just apparently asked James at MDD to have a debate with me.
That'd be a good time to bring this up
with him. He
with
didn't say what about, but now that you say that, it might be about subjective morality. But he and I have clashed before on the definition of atheism, so that's probably what it is. But honestly, I would be more interested in the morality discussion.
Well, it sounds like Steve McRae looked for you. That puts you at the advantage.
I don't know why.
Why not?
I don't know. I just want to know like where.
You know, you're a super weird dude. You know that, right?
I try.
Yeah, like you're really an oddball. I know, but you're really bright and you're honest, and that's odd.
Thanks.
No, that's just my observations, not a compliment. So why would Steve McRae not look for somebody like you? Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's aware of me, but I didn't know that I attracted his particular attention.
Yeah, I guess you did, though.
I'm not active on Twitter or anything, but I've talked to him a couple times on it.
Yeah.
So, but I try not to press people's buttons so that maybe they will want to talk to me at some point.
Yeah. I think it's at least wisdom. It's at least good calculation. Even if it wasn't natural, it'd be a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, remember Sammy Jenkins said he really enjoyed our talk, which is just as much compliment to you as it is to me. And thank you, Remember Sammy. Yeah. And you guys go and check out Snake Was Right. Go and subscribe to his channel. He's saying some really interesting things, whether you agree with him or not. They're super interesting. And at least worth a subscribe and a review on occasion. Anything you would want to close out with, bud?
No, I think just we'll talk again, and
anytime you like. Yeah. Would you need help getting something going with like Skylar Fiction if you wanted to? Or I mean, if you needed help with that, I could help, just not much, but a tiny bit. I could help.
Yeah, I haven't ever interacted with him. I don't know how to contact him, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd even.
Is it okay if I give him your information? Is that okay?
Yeah, and I'd love to have you maybe moderate if you want to do that too.
I think knowing you both as I do, you wouldn't need a moderator, but I'd be happy to sit there. And if you guys get too excited, I would say something like bigger pauses between sentences. Not that I think you guys need moderated. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I also like having maybe 3 or 4 people in a conversation too. That's always interesting.
Okay. All right, cool. We should have to set something like that up soon then.
Yeah, man.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, Taylor, once again, you've been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Peace and respect. You got to hit that little red circle with the white button at the bottom of your screen there, because I don't kick people. You kick yourself, okay?
Alrighty.
All right, man. Peace and respect.
Man.
Thank you so much.
See you soon.
All right, guys, that's the end of the show. Thank you all for your attendance. Geo Sam, this one guy. Remember Sammy Jenkins, Brother John. Who else was in here? Terrible memory. Thanks for all stopping by. Peace and respect to you all. I do look forward to the day that we're all great friends.